Perfect. Well, welcome everyone to the October MillerKnoll Design Perspectives. For the month of October and the month of November, we are bringing to you CEU topics because we know how important CEUs are for all interior design and architecture professionals to keep up your professional licenses. So this month on Design Perspectives, we have Amy Osherman, who is the MillerKnoll Director of Archives, as our subject matter expert, and she's going to be sharing with you CEU celebrating 100 plus years of Florence Knoll defining modern. And Evelyn, is there anything that you would share with the group before we start the presentation in terms of the CEU credits for the call?
Yes, absolutely, Alan. So I have put a form in the chat where you can fill out your AIA and IDCEC numbers for credit. So check that out and please fill that out.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Evelyn. All right, Amy, without further ado, we will turn it over to you. One thing I did forget to say, we will have some time at the end for Q&A. So as Amy is going through the Florence Knoll presentation and questions come to mind, please jot them in chat. And at the end of the presentation, I'll take a look at those questions and give those to Amy on your behalf. So for the second time, without further ado, Amy, over to you.
Thanks, Alan, and thanks everyone for joining over your presumably lunch hour, depending on where you are in the world, to talk about one of my personal favorite designers, and obviously someone who is a legendary person, not only in the Knoll and MillerKnoll universe, but in the design world in general. So here is our subject for today. Florence Knoll Bassett was born, actually Florence Schust, in Saginaw, Michigan in 1917. She was orphaned at the age of 12, and her guardian, Emile Tessin, thought she would thrive best in the companionable atmosphere of a good girls' boarding school. And so Florence was allowed to make a selection of which school she wanted to go to. And once she visited Kingswood School for Girls in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, which was part of the 350-acre Cranbrook campus designed by Eliel Saarinen, she said she, quote, made an immediate decision that it was the right place for her. When she arrived at Kingswood, she met Rachel DeWolf Raisman, head of Kingswood's art department. Mrs. Raisman asked her what she would like to do there, and Florence, then aged 14, said, I would like to design a house. Something else about Rachel DeWolf Raisman, she was actually the first woman to be granted an architecture degree from Cornell Architecture School. And so I love that she early on kind of recognized Florence's talent and fostered that at Cranbrook. This was Florence's original model of the house she said she wanted to design, and it's now in the Cranbrook archives. She said that she made doors on both ends of the very ample garage because she was just learning how to drive and didn't know how to back up. A recent graduate of Cornell, as I said, in architecture, Mrs. Raisman taught Florence how to use a T-square and triangle so that she could draw plans and elevations of her house. And she sent Florence to the school's carpenter shop to have models made. Interiors were also part of this project. Similar to the arrangement at Cranbrook, Kingswood's drafting studio was adjacent to the sculpture and weaving studios, where at the latter, under the supervision of Loya Saarinen, Florence furnished her house model and developed a lifelong interest in textiles as well as generally in texture and color. When Florence graduated from Kingswood, and this is her graduation photograph you are looking at, she was described in the yearbook as follows. Florence's ambition is to be an architect and an interior decorator someday. From all appearances, however, we think she should just stay home and be contented to be the most popular debutante of the season. Florence would decorate any party. Oh dear, God, that did not happen. While at Kingswood, Florence's architectural ambitions attracted the attention of Eliel Saarinen and his wife and sculptor Loya, who made her an adjunct member of their family and took her back to Finland with them during the summers. Florence entered Cranbrook in September 1934, where she studied architecture under Eliel Saarinen. After graduating from Cranbrook, Florence studied at the Architectural Association in London, but had to return to the United States in 1939 as war threatened Europe. She apprenticed in the office of Bauhaus refugees, including Walter Gropius and Marcel Breuer, and then ended up going to Chicago to study with Mies van der Rohe, another Bauhaus member, actually the last director of the Bauhaus before it was closed. And Mies at that point was teaching what is now the Illinois Institute of Technology. Florence later said that Mies, who became a friend as well as a teacher, that he, quote, had a profound effect on her design approach and the clarification of her design. At the end of the school year, she moved to New York to work for the firm of Harrison and Abramovitz. It was there that she met her future husband, Hans Knoll, who had come to the office to show off a chair his furniture firm was selling. In 1943, she went to work for Knoll, finding an immediate need there for space planning services and an overall design approach. The Knoll Planning Unit, as she called it, was established that same year to create totally designed interiors, from the initial plan to the final selection and placement of accessories and art objects. Florence and Hans were married in 1946, and their firm became known as Knoll Associates. Florence's first Knoll showroom was this on the left at 601 Madison Avenue in New York City, designed not long after she joined the firm. Working with Jens Rism, Florence Knoll knew that she wanted the firm's products to relate to each other in an attractive space, not to just line up like those of every other firm. Knoll had little money and materials were in short supply because of the war, so Florence, by then affectionately known as Shoe, which is a shortening of her maiden name Schust, she used cotton cord to create a dramatic, artful screen wall, which both enclosed the space and allowed the visitor to see through it. Behind the screen, furnishing fabrics were displayed on panels like an abstract composition of colored squares by Joseph Albers. And on the right is actually a recreation of this showroom installation that was done in a show at MoMA a few years ago. In 1947, Florence had established Knoll Textiles to provide, as she said, a source for quality fabrics compatible with contemporary interiors. From the beginning, she valued true colors, interesting textures, and serviceability. When the Knoll New York showroom moved from 575 Madison Avenue in 1951, Florence Knoll was again faced with a great challenge. The imposing glass office building had low ceilings inside with misplaced columns and walls that departed from the plumb line. The showroom space itself was a poorly proportioned, narrow oblong with windows that faced asphalt and concrete. So she ignored the ceiling and divided the interior with a black metal frame from which she hung colored panels that made the low ceiling seem higher and that established the dominant verticals and horizontals as well as the color accents of the showroom. She also covered the window view with translucent panels that produced a clear white light. In the Chicago showroom of 1953, Florence Knoll had the opposite problem of Madison Avenue. Working in a windowless space with a high ceiling full of ductwork in the merchandise mart, she simply erased the problems by painting the entire showroom black and spotlighting the furniture and objects she wanted to show. She also put in an oak floor to add warmth to the black void. By comparison, the San Francisco showroom space was nicer to work with. It was an old wooden factory building fitted with a timbered ceiling that provided a handsome texture and thick floor-to-ceiling columns. She painted the walls and the ceiling white except for the colored panels and large squares that divided the interior both vertically and horizontally. She also made a balcony to create a space above. On the balcony, she used a planter box instead of a railing and has said that she would never get away with that today, which is very true. And the balcony was connected by solid, very elegant walnut steps. The Los Angeles showroom was a long, narrow, glass-fronted storefront, making a virtue of necessity. Florence Knoll thought the open, visible interior could be a good advertisement for Knoll. Creating interest in the ceiling with 3 ceiling arches that also relieved the rectangular repetition of the plan. She divided the space with screen walls and panels that still allowed a passerby to see the whole space at once. The European showrooms presented their own problems or opportunities. In Milan, the Knoll showroom occupied an old palazzo that had been, as someone put it, negatively remodeled and furnished with a long line of structural columns. To distract from the columns, Florence Knoll created a butterfly ceiling that reshaped the space and that also helped with the ceiling height. Using her now trademark color panels, she also asked the sculptor Harry Bertoia, by then part of the Knoll team, to create a work for the entrance wall. On the other side of the space, as she had done earlier in New York, fabrics were displayed on panels and arranged like another modern work of art. In designing these showrooms, Florence Knoll also redefined the executive office, which traditionally included a desk shaped like an oblong box with a work table behind it. This arrangement took up quite a bit of space, so she reversed the plan as the diagram shows, creating desks that looked like tables and came in different shapes: round, oval, boat-shaped, and that could also be used for comfortably for conferences. The Knoll table desk became an industry standard, and Florence Knoll invented it. Her most important executive office was the one she designed for Hans Knoll. It was small, only 12 by 12 feet, but felt generous. A credenza behind provided ample concealed storage, freeing the plan and allowing the office to double as a conference room. The office became a sales tool for Knoll because it made their clients realize that space was important and that a working office could also be habitable and attractive. Knoll's catalog at this time illustrated this office and pointed out, with a touch of romance, that the dusky reddish tones of the teak desktop contrasted subtly with the bluish satin ribbon finish of the steel legs. The split bamboo blinds, which, quote, prevented a good sharp midtown view from intruding, blended all into a dreamlike golden interior. Florence Knoll developed her concept of the executive office in a series of now famous corporate interiors. For Look magazine, she commissioned this beautiful screen wall made by Irwin Hauer of white open blocks that divided the space, but which you could also see through. The office of Look's publisher, Gardner Cowles, led out to a nice little terrace, and Florence Knoll designed the space to take advantage of it. With meticulous attention to detail, she placed every interior object she selected for the office, from furniture to works of art, on her signature paste-ups. These plans representing textures with actual fabric and veneer samples. It was a system she invented and continues to be used this day. The idea, of course, was to give the client as complete and exact an idea as possible of the finished interior. In it, fabrics, finishes, furniture, and accessories are carefully coordinated to the scale and nature of the architectural space. The Rockefeller Family Office of 1946 in Rockefeller Center was one of Florence's earliest projects. She likes to say that she started at the top. The furniture was custom made of fine woods and materials, but everything was kept low key. For his office, Nelson Rockefeller had one request, and that was to keep his existing inkwell because he liked the pen. The problem for Florence Knoll was that the inkwell was made of plastic and looked out of place. So she solved the problem by asking her friend, the sculptor Isamu Noguchi, to make a wood cover for it. Apparently, everyone was happy with the result, and I would love to know where that inkwell is today. If anyone knows, let me know. Nelson Rockefeller's L-shaped desk was her first unconventionally shaped desk. By the time she redid Hans's office at 575 Madison Avenue, seen here, the desk was oval, giving the space a more welcoming yet still efficient look. Frank Stanton, president of CBS, had been a client of Florence's since the early 1950s. When he asked Florence to design the executive offices of CBS's new office building on West 52nd Street in 1960, she had to select and place every object in the building, including an important art collection. The building had been designed by Eero Saarinen and was at the time known as Black Rock because of the dark Vermont granite columns that articulated the facade. Problematically, work had already begun on the interior when Florence was called in, and the office spaces were divided into modular squares with sides that were multiples of 5 feet. For Frank Stanton's 25 square foot office, Florence relieved the rectilinearity of the space and created interest in the ceiling with black arches that concealed the air conditioning vents and made a pattern in the ceiling related to the plan. Florence had an easier time at Connecticut General a decade earlier because she and the planning unit were responsible for the layout of the interiors and furniture of the entire complex from the beginning when the firm of Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill started developing the architecture. Connecticut General President Frazar Wild, whose office you are looking at here, complete with the model of his boat, was given a modern table desk and furnishings that were in stark contrast to the colonial revival fittings the firm had traditionally used in the years prior. The conference room at Connecticut General included an oval table that was comfortable and spacious for meetings. The space was divided behind with a fabric-wrapped panel that provided a certain amount of acoustic protection. For the open office area, Florence borrowed from her showrooms the system of metal uprights fitted with primary color panels as space dividers that connected to the ceilings. These created office areas of Connecticut General that were divided but open. This is actually the employee lounge area at Connecticut General. However, we still get a sense of how Florence organized and divided space with her system of brightly colored panels. Meetings were held twice a month to discuss this project, led by Florence. Unlike other contemporary women designers such as Ray Eames, there was never any question as to the role Florence played. Connecticut General urgently needed more space, and the move to the suburbs outside Hartford allowed it. Completed in 1956, the Connecticut General campus was built on 280 acres in a rural setting on a lake with recreational areas and several buildings grouped around interior courtyards, also designed by Isamu Noguchi. The park was overlooked from this large conference room shown here. In 1955, while the Connecticut General project was still ongoing, Hans Knoll died in an automobile accident, and Florence Knoll became the president of Knoll Associates and Knoll International. Through her work in Florida at the First National Bank of Miami, Florence met her second husband, the banker Harry Hood Bassett, who she married in 1958. In addition to her corporate work, Knoll completed projects for residences, universities, hospitals, hotels, and other institutions, and she also designed several exhibitions. Trained by Eliel Saarinen, Mies van Dro, Walter Gropius, Marcel Breuer, and Wallace K. Harrison, and friend and Cranbrook colleague Eero Saarinen, Harry Bertoia, Ralph Rapson, Ray Eames, Charles Eames, and others, Florence Knoll put these and other leading contemporary artists, designers, or some of them, to work for Knoll. This is an advertisement from 1945 designed by Alvin Lustig for Ralph Rapson's armchair collection. Her policy of crediting designers by name and paying them royalties laid the foundations for the strong working relationships upon which the commercial success of Knoll Associates was built. Florence's top pool of top designers, many of whom were personal friends, were people like Noguchi, Alexander Calder, and very importantly, the Swiss graphic designer Herbert Matter. Matter had immigrated to the United States in 1936 and was a pioneer in the use of photography for advertising. Matter gave the Knoll firm its visual identity in all its printed materials, from stationery and catalogs to billboards. It was said that the graphic personality Matter created for Knoll closely matched the overall consistent style Florence Knoll was trying to achieve. This advertisement for Herbert Matter for Knoll Textiles shows not only his cleverness in combining the typography of his Knoll K, which you saw in some earlier showroom entrances, with his beautiful close-up photography here of textiles, but also Florence's love and promotion of textiles. Florence has never taken much credit for her own furniture designs, which she used to describe as, quote, fillers around the star pieces of the artists and designers who she commissioned to work for Knoll. However, another invention of Florence Knoll's was the use of parallel bars or T-bars and crossbars as supports for tables, desks, and seating. This system was introduced in 1956 and first used in the offices of Connecticut General in conjunction with the building's contemporary glass and steel architecture. Here's some more of her furniture designs, including some stacking stools and the parallel bar sofa. Some of her sofa designs that are still in production today. The T-bar tables. The desk that we saw earlier. The clean and spare geometry of Florence Knoll's designs owe something to the furniture of her teacher, Mies van der Rohe. Knoll produced Mies's famous Barcelona chair and some other pieces, having promised that the firm would only use the best materials and highest quality of manufacture. Florence Knoll and the Knoll Planning Unit consistently experimented with modern materials and new forms, and among them was this bentwood chair developed with Don Pettit, part of a larger collection of chairs by Pettit. Pettit had pointed out that earlier bentwood pieces, which were round in section, were wasteful of wood. So Knoll developed this handsome square section series that was both comfortable and popular. Richard Schultz designed this wooden pedestal table series treated for both indoor and outdoor use. He designed the table in 1960 to accompany chairs that Harry Bertoia had created for Knoll. Schultz has since described Knoll as both a furniture and interior design company where he was given the invaluable experience of designing for an actual use. He recalled, quote, "You had to do everything yourself. You designed the furniture, you invented the way to make it, you designed the jigs and the tooling, and for a little while you were in charge of production until it got going and the various foremen and supervisors took over. Then you went on to something else. It was a fabulous education," he said, "because it meant that what you designed had to be producible." Florence knew Harry Bertoia from Cranbrook, where they overlapped during the 1937 school year. Bertoia was hired by Knoll as a sculptor and given a studio by the Knoll factory in East Greenville, where he had access to the firm's machinery. He could do whatever he wanted, sculpture or furniture, and he did both for the firm. He made sculptures for the showrooms, as we have seen, and developed the now famous line of wire mesh furniture formed into seating shells and set into metal stands. The wire chairs have always been sold with removable seat pads and covers, but were also sculptures in their own right. Eero Saarinen and Florence were interested in developing new ideas. Building upon earlier experiments that Saarinen had conducted with Charles and Ray Eames, Knoll and Saarinen wanted to try to make a sculptural plastic chair. A plastic base they found would not be strong enough to support the weight, so they decided to make the base part of the chair with aluminum. They couldn't find a manufacturer that could form the plastic part of the seat, however, and were happy to discover a ship hull builder in New Jersey who was willing to try. They had lots of problems and failures until they finally got a chair that would work. In 2008, the Tulip collection celebrated its 50th anniversary, and in honor of this, Knoll added a special platinum finish. The chairs designed by Bertoia and Saarinen made wonderful subjects for Herbert Matter and consequently for advertisements for Knoll. Matter's most famous ad, or one of them, showed a chimney sweep sitting in a bright red Saarinen womb chair, shown here, implying perhaps something about the soil repellent nature of Knoll upholsteries. According to legend, this is one of the few Matter ads that Florence Knoll didn't like because she thought it was undignified. In 1959, Florence Knoll sold Knoll to Art Metal. She retired as president of the company the following year while continuing to work as a consultant and serving as the firm's design director. In 1965, she resigned from Knoll entirely after completing the interior design of the CBS offices. However, in 1972, a large exhibition of Knoll products was held in Paris at the Louvre. Florence then attended the opening as an honored guest, accompanied by the French Minister of Culture. The exhibition, a retrospective of Knoll's work, was designed by Massimo and Lella Vignelli. Visitors climbed through the grand staircase of the Louvre and entered the exhibition through the N of oversized three-dimensional letters that spelled Knoll, of which you can see here. This is Florence at the exhibition with Yves Vidal, who was the head of Knoll International at the time. She has a very cool outfit on too, as usual. More exhibition views. I love these. The Vignellis created plastic cubes on casters to display the work of each of Knoll's designers. All the fans of modern furniture in Paris became known as Knollistes. It's probably butchered that. I've also heard that in Europe, Knoll is sometimes, or mid-century modern furniture in general is just referred to as Knoll, which I love. In spring 2004, Florence began work on an exhibition at the Philadelphia Museum of Art that opened the following November called Florence Knoll, Bassett, Defining Modern. The curators asked Florence to be her own curator and create an exhibition and installation that would represent her design work. Shortly thereafter, both Knoll and the Philadelphia Museum of Art received a list of exhibition furniture illustrated with original drawings, which was needed first in order to allow adequate time for delivery, as well as manufacture of out-of-production models like the parallel bars, lounge chair, and coffee table. We all know about lead times. The museum had earlier sent Mrs. Knoll a plan of the design gallery, an awkward small space of 330 square feet. In return, according to her traditional, quote, paste-up practice, Florence produced her installation design furnished with samples of fabric and veneer. She said she had started this presentation method while as a student at the Architectural Association in London and developed it when the planning unit was formed at Knoll. Building a cardboard model fitted with scale renderings of the gallery's content, she first resolved the problem of the high, narrow proportions of the space, broken by 3 doors and a window. Florence defined each of these principal gallery walls with colored panels on which she hung photo blow-ups of her celebrated interior, thereby drawing attention away from the ceiling. The blow-ups provide a setting for the furniture displayed in front of them and illustrate the original contexts of the pieces. Florence also chose to display diagrams and an actual sample of the crossbar leg she invented to support her chairs and tables, again relating to bar systems furniture in the gallery and illustrated in interior views. She also showed her diagram of the conference table desk, which doubles as an abstract composition in black and white. As in all of her work, Florence knew exactly what she wanted and how to get it from the very beginning of the project. She took endless pains to ensure that the execution lived up to her concept, whether this meant visiting the printing firm where the photo blow-ups were being produced outside of New York, or making special visit to Philadelphia to check the colors she had selected in the light of the gallery. Clear and concise in both message and appearance, the exhibition demonstrates how elegantly Florence defined modern and how she continues to define the Knoll design commitment to workplace furnishings today. To wrap up, as an architect, interior space planner, and furniture designer, the commitment Florence Knoll made to design excellence in everything resonates clearly. Thank you for your time and attention, and we can open it up to questions. One last thing, in 2003, Florence was awarded the National Medal of Arts for her immeasurable, truly, contributions to modern design. The National Medal of Arts is the highest honor for achievement in the field, presented annually by the President of the United States to individuals or groups deserving of special recognition by reason of their outstanding contributions to excellence, growth, support, and availability of the art. It is only one of a countless array of honors and awards bestowed on Florence during her lifetime. So I will leave it there. I'll leave it on this photo because I love it, of Shu and her dog Cartree also made it into a lot of ads. But yeah, thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Amy, for sharing. So, any questions you have for Amy about Florence Knoll, or actually anything archival regarding our design history, please enter those in chat. I'm seeing lots of thumbs up and hearts, and thank you for sharing the love. I love the images and photos. Amazing woman in capital letter. Okay. Here's a question. It says, it's from Michael. What a great presentation. Thank you. Do you have a favorite book or podcast about Florence Knoll? I'd be grateful for any recommendations.
Yes, there are. Hold on.
And before Amy, you answer that question, I have to say you're asking the right person that question, because Amy, we haven't really talked about Amy's role within MillerKnoll, but she is the head archivist for all of our brands, and has actually spent a majority of her career with us in the Herman Miller archives. But within the last couple of years, Amy, you've been really digging deep into Knoll's archives and history, and merging all of this together. So this is a woman with amazing credentials as well as insight. So I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Wow, Alan, thanks. And that gave me time to go Google there's recently a podcast series called New Angle, and it's about women in design and architecture who unfortunately have been left out of the canon in a lot of ways. So one of my favorite parts of my job is telling those stories and kind of adding to history a bit, because design is not done in a vacuum by singular geniuses most of the time. So, I mean, Florence Knoll was a singular genius, but there's a lot of people who had their hands in creating spaces or products for these iconic brands, and so it's interesting to hear other perspectives. I'm there's a book recently published called No Compromise, the work of Florence Knoll. I'm also putting it in the chat. So those are two great resources book-wise. There's one more. There's a great Knoll textiles book that I'm going to put in here too. Any other questions?
Yeah,
Alan,
so while you're entering that, Katie from Southern California asked, do you have any information on Herbert Matter's ad that features a diamond Bertie chair as well as a female rocker wrestler?
That does not ring a bell, but now I'll be digging through Knoll boxes to see what that might be. That's amazing.
Yeah, well, if just as a heads up, this is Katie Hendricks, and she's with our team in Southern California. Amy, you might connect with Katie just to get a little context on that before you start to do your research.
Someone too. Herbert Matter CEU would be amazing, because something that's not part of this CEU is that Herbert Matter actually worked for the Eames office before Florence kind of poached him to do Knoll's visual identity. So in my role as now archives for MillerKnoll, it's really fun to learn about those connections across the brands that allow for some continuity, but also Herbert Matter himself was an incredible designer that obviously shaped a lot of the visual language of Knoll early on, and also in some cases for Herman Miller. So thank you, Mark, for that prompt, and Evelyn, next CEU that we can make.
Right. So here's so you have lots of comments on like thank yous, fabulous presentation. Next question is where did Florence Knoll grow up?
Saginaw, Michigan. And so, I mean, said it at the beginning, but she was orphaned in her preteen era, and obviously ended up at Cranbrook, but also kind of tragic. So Yeah, she's a Michigander, which also small world.
Yep, yep, exactly. So Beth asks, what was the name she gave her cardboard floor planning system?
She would call them paste ups. I'm seeing if there's anything. There might be like fun articles about that somewhere online, but that she would call them paste ups and essentially would do them for each project. So I'm gonna put that in here too.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I see someone. How's the new experience going at the design yard? It's
Yeah,
going.
exactly. And
We're
before
running towards a spring opening, so everybody put out good energy that happens.
Yeah. So just a little context for the group. Gail mentions the design yard. So we are headquartered in West Michigan, and the design yard building is our headquarters building where our executives sit. It's primarily where we take clients on visits to our headquarters, and Amy and her team are working on an archival experience at our design yard headquarters in Michigan. So if any of you and or your clients have a trip to Michigan after, let's say, spring of 2024, that will be part of the client experience. Hopefully Amy will be in town and can help host tours, but it should be quite an experience. And I do have a question for you, Amy, on this, not to put you on the spot, but something I'm curious about. So I know that we have the good fortune of having archives, which are like true archives, flat files filled with wonderful drawings and original textiles, climate controlled vault. Will it be that kind of archive, or will it be a combination of sort of archival storage as well as exhibition, or what can you tell us along those lines? Do you know yet?
It is going to be more exhibition like. Right now we do have amazing big warehouse full of boxes with cool stuff in it, but the new space will be both sort of an open storage experience, but what I've been referring to it is it's like our design museum. We have the most consequential design brands in history, I would say. And so the collections that both Knoll and Herman Miller have amassed over the years of the many different artifacts that get created in the design process, whether that's a piece of correspondence or a design drawing or a prototype or the finished product itself. It's exciting. It's going to feel like an exhibition. Thank you. I see in the chat, Carolyn, thanks for putting the Rizzoli Knoll book in there. I see someone too, are the archives, material, and stories heritage of Knoll Associates different from Knoll International? They're intertwined. And that's still something too that I think we're figuring out how best to storytell around, because after Florence retires in 1965, what was then called it switched from Knoll Associates to Knoll International. That date I'm not able to pull out of my brain at this exact moment, but it's a continuation. And there were design leaders post Florence like Yves Vidal, who kind of carried on the Knoll design torch and did things like acquire Gavina and truly make it an international company. I see, how are you impacting choosing what to keep from the brands? That is a great question, and it kind of happens brand by brand, project by project. And so, in my opinion, all of the brands that are part of MillerKnoll have their own unique heritage and histories. A company like Hay did just turn 20. There are iconic products that they make that you can storytell around. So it's our intent to have stories from all of our brands, because all of our brands work with amazing designers and have interesting histories. So a lot of that is working with their records creators, whether that's the designers themselves, the product and marketing teams, And yeah, so sorry. Someone asked,
Yeah.
will the design yard feature any of the pieces from the Knoll Museum in East Greenville? Yes, it will. So that is all currently in storage, and we're kind of doing a condition report project, and then also figuring out how to incorporate that here too.
Yeah. Here's an interesting one. How many furniture designers are in-house now that Knoll and Herman Miller are one?
That I don't. So
I can
we do.
attempt to answer, but you go ahead.
Well, I would say that we do have an internal design team. However, for Knoll and Herman Miller, the way that products will be made or briefed is still with outside designers, how it always has been.
Yeah, yeah, and I would concur with that. I mean, I think the premise of both Herman Miller and Knoll, as well as the other companies that fall underneath that brand, it could be Holly Hunt, it could be Hay, so on and so forth, are all really focused on working with external designers that have their own design networks. But you know, there is some work to probably existing product platforms that happens internally to evolve those and keep those current. So another one from Helena, what are good books on MillerKnoll for students?
Well, there's no MillerKnoll book quite yet, and I
Yet.
think like the answer to that are books about Knoll and Herman Miller, of which there were some put in the chat. Herman Miller, we did put out a monograph on the history of the company a few years ago called Herman Miller, A Way of Living. Knoll,
Which
there's a
Amy
Knoll.
co-authored, by the way, so she won't say that, but I will.
Well, it's a very good book.
Yeah.
And then the Knoll Rizzoli book, I believe, is gettable. It might be out of print, but I would suggest that there is a great fight-in book on Hay. There's
Yeah.
one about Herman Miller. There are books about Knoll. There's a great book about Knoll textiles that I put in. So I will say, though, in 2025, we are working with Cranbrook Art Museum on an exhibition, of which Knoll and Herman Miller are really the two main protagonists of the story of mid-century modern in America and how it influenced the world. But that will also have an exhibition catalog, which I think, Helena, which is kind of what you're after in terms of a book for students that puts everything in context and tells the stories of the brands.
Yeah, yeah. And I do see we have a number of questions, and I'll defer to Evelyn on this to either put in chat or come off mute, but it looks like she's responding. We've never questions about the CEU credits, right? So I see Evelyn just put the form in chat for everyone interested in that. Evelyn, any comments you would add regarding the CEU credits?
Yes, absolutely. So we have the form for credit with AIA and IDCEC. For those who are seeking credit with other organizations, we will be sending out a certificate of completion to all attendees who attended the majority of the session within the next few days. So be on the lookout. It will come from MillerKnoll. So if you're not seeing it, you may want to check also in your spam inbox because sometimes it does end up there. But that will go out to anyone who attended.
Perfect, perfect. And Amy, I have one final question for you. This is a question that I'm wondering. So you said in the presentation, Florence Knoll retired from Knoll in, I think it was 1965, right? And she lived almost another 50 years to 2019, primarily on the southeast coast of Florida, Coral Gables, I think. And so what did she do with the second half of her life? Did she pursue, do you know, a second career? Did she just enjoy wedded bliss with her new husband?
I mean, this might be a question that legacy Knollies can answer better than I. My interpretation, like I just talked about how amazing Florence Knoll was and her accomplishments and
Yep.
her credentials as an architect and a designer, and yet there's contemporary magazine articles and the way that she's written about where it's this woman knew what she want and she was difficult, and I just imagine it had to have been so annoying for her at a certain point to still not always get the respect that she deserved in the workplace. And so I think, as was put in the chat, worked on her own design projects. I think did work for her husband, Harry, and the banks. But yeah, I wish she got to build more buildings, honestly. She was learned from the best, probably could have made some really cool buildings, but as the time did not allow for women to be seen as equal players in that field, she made a lot of lemonade and made her mark on design. That, I even still hear people sometimes say to me, like, oh, what, did she marry Hans? And like, that's how she got it? I'm like, no, she made the business viable, actually. And it was her Rolodex that they were able to tap into to commission all the iconic designs. So
Perfect. Yeah, the comments in chat are consistent with what I had heard, that her second husband was in banking, right? So she did a lot of work through him. I've actually talked to some interior designers in Florida who I believe worked with her on some of those projects, and then additional projects from there. So we thank you everyone for joining the October MillerKnoll Design Perspectives. Thank you, Amy, for presenting this beautiful presentation. And then look for the invitation. We're doing another CEU in October. It's a brand new CEU, and it's focused on the impact of hospitality in healthcare environments. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you again, Amy, and we'll look forward to seeing you in November.
thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.